So good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Yes, Father.
Night at 10:20 here in the Philippines. So I will be boring you with 252 slides. No, just joking. Just joking. I'll be brief. I'll just skip some. But I like, first of all, let me thank the organizers and also the speakers. I actually have learned a lot. And as regards to that too, and to some of the things that they have said. I like, for example, Dr. Youssef mention of uniqueness, equality in terms of the religions. And if I could add something to that, according to John Paul II, he actually adds another one in relation to the body, and that is, I think the religions should work on, have worked on uniqueness, have worked now on equality. The next stage, I believe, that is apparent according to John, if we will use John Paul II's idea, is actually complementarity. To learn from one's, to be complementary. To learn to be complementary. What I do is actually helpful to you too. In that sense, I would actually present my study on Christ, cross, and COVID-19, the words that never die in the new normal religious communication. I begin with the structure, and this will be quick. Structure and definition of terms: religious communication as transmission of belief and practice. COVID-19 is pandemic, virus, reality. The new normal for me is not actually an adjective. It's supposed to be a noun. What do I mean? It's supposed to be an attitude rather than an adjective that describes it. It's an attitude that we have of doing things. Different perspective. The 7 last words of Jesus is a communication. It's actually words of a dying person, last will and testament, 7-fold practice of hope, which later on I would suggest as terms for religious education, religious communication in the future, which means training forward, moving forward. It's a guide to action. The last thing actually to die, I was told by one of our Italian priests before. I spent around 11 years in Italy as well, and then 16 years in Australia. Then I have encountered many ideas in terms of culture. One of them actually is the idea of hope. One of our old priests in Italy was saying it is actually the last thing to die, hope. And that words for me, in the last words, actually are words that never die. It's an invitation to significance as well as undying hope. These are sort of the problems of the thesis, of the challenges, which are I term as challenges. How do these different current realities and prerequisites of the new normal relate to religious communication, which was highlighted already by Father Anthony in his opening speech. And then, is there not a seeming counterculturality between communication, communication of religious faith, normally practiced by Filipinos through rituals, and the new normal, which seems to hinder actually them, which is actually the report a while ago of as well of Dr. Cohen. And then what converging affordances in religious communication is evident between the new normal and the 7 last words of Jesus? And then how would they impact on communication among different religious faiths? So these are the 4 questions that have guided this. The reality of COVID-19, we all know safety protocols, new normal in the Philippines, different lockdowns from ECQ to MCQ to MGCQ, all the Qs anyway, all the Qs. They have all the Qs. And it's still continuing. It's still continuing. Flexible learning, we all know that. People are homebound. And then the idea that no one is actually exempted from COVID-19 or its effect. No one. It affects everyone. It affects everyone. So there is a global challenge, therefore, COVID-19 of death. And here comes, this is research. COVID-19 comes as the new cross in need actually of healing for each of us. It comes as a new challenge, a new tragedy, a new crisis in need of hope and healing. Okay, this is one of the things that I have put inside that thesis. The concept of the new normal is neither something that is new. No, it's not. Nor a sole fruit begotten by COVID-19 pandemic. It's actually started, the new normal in itself. Even in the 1890s, there is already a mention of the new normal. Even in terms of war, September 11, there's already the new normal. And then, like social media communication, the phrase new normal can be considered as a product of evolution rather than a revolution. It's a product of evolution rather than an evolution, similar to social media. And this has been testified by many psychologists like Coyle and others, the Canadian. It's actually a product of evolution rather than a revolution. The 7 last words which I will associate with the sevenfold practice of hope are here. I think you know most of them, Father. And then the gospel readings where they are actually here. And then where we like to go is treatment of this, in each of this, for religious communication in the new normal. Entreaty, which says, Father, forgive them. Disclosure. Woman, behold thy son, which speaks of relationships in the religious communication. Eli Eli, lema sabachthani, isolation, abandonment. Fulfillment in the iters. It is finished. Of course, there is fulfillment and entrustment. Into your hands I commend my spirit. So there is a variety. And this is what actually I did put in here. Most of this, the religious communication, the one that you will find out, and I will preempt it, speaks mostly about identity, which is what communication is. Transmission of identity, transmission of who I am, and the discovery of who the other person is in relation to me. So most of these are actually based on that. And Pope Francis has mentioned this, the crucifix is our compass and hope in life, actually. That's the hope. And then one of the favorite philosophers here in our seminary, it's actually Nietzsche, who said, he who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow. And he who has a why in communication, I always believe, can bear with almost anyhow in communication. That's by Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, the words on the cross become the new normal way of guiding deacons to how religious communication can be effectuated during the pandemic. They herald hope in God, the first and the last word of creation. So there is the balance between the first and the last word. I like the balance of Dr. Yusef, really, and what he had mentioned about the creation and balance. Thank you, Dr. Yusef. And then, this is just the first. Oops, I will go on here. Okay, the first word is, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. Okay, I will just skip this one. And then this one speaks of entreaty that I have highlighted. Luke's communicate, the Gospel of Luke communicates a unitary link in the identity, as has been mentioned, of Jesus who harmonizes himself with God. Entreaty in religious communication emerges from the prayer of mercy. Father, forgive them, for the people and for God. Entreaty is better understood, I always believe, in the dual concept of etymology. This is the Hebrew one, of mercy, which is the rahamim and the hesed. The rahamim is synonymous to that tender compassion and often induces persons peripheral acts or resources that can elevate a felt need. Ayan, that is actually the rahamim. Hesed, nonetheless, refers to a covenant love, steadfast loyalty, commitment, or promise. In reality, when I first saw rahamim and hesed, I thought to myself, maybe our concept of mercy and compassion that we always put together is actually redundant, because rahamim, mercy, is already compassion. Perhaps we focus more really on mercy as compassion rather than as a loyalty. And I think that is entreaty. In our religious communication, we do not only actually give compassion, but actually it speaks of our commitment to our religious belief, whatever it is, of the God we serve, and that is actually entreaty. Okay, the entreaty, it reads as entreaty, Father, forgive them, is identity of the Father. It's actually identity of God who calls. Then they know not, knowledge and wisdom, fruit of who we are in Tagalog. In Filipino, it's called Buma. Knowledge in the Bible, okay, I know, I understand, I comprehend. Cogito ergo sum, according to Descartes. Cogito ergo sum. Responds to the call as your identity. And then what they do, it's a fruit of being, is actually doing. If you know a bit of the Italian as well, fare insegnare instead of fare insegnanti, that it is always better to concentrate first on what makes a teacher rather than what to teach. The acts done in relation to a response. So the communication is actually done in relation to also to a response. What does entreaty mean in terms of religious education? Religious communication in the new normal challenges persons to go beyond communication which focuses only on transmitting acts. It's not only a transmission, but it's actually rooting that communication in one act of commitment and identity as children of God. Example here in the Convent narrative is actually the Maginhawa Community Pantry. When the founder, Patricia noon, as a slogan, she said, kumuha ayon sa pangangailangan, which means get according to your needs and give according to your capacity. She's actually only 26 years old, and she has inspired as her way of communication, religious communication, by what she did actually. Even in the community pantry as a COVID narrative, in terms of communication, no one actually cannot not give, because it's actually you give according to your capacity. Whatever you can give. And when we interviewed her before, she was asked, what after COVID-19, what do you think of your community pantry or mutual aid? Will it stop? And the way she answered was actually superb too. She said, I think it will never stop because people will always be in need of one thing or the other. And that's where the community pantry always exists. We are there because of a felt need that we have actually to respond to. So that is actually a form of entreaty, answering the need of the other. Okay, the second one is, you will be with me in paradise, mentioned by Jesus, of course, to the thief. That's in Luke. So what is it? What is there? This is actually a disclosure, which speaks of themselves being under the same sentence of condemnation. This refers to the thief, and actually that thief saying to Christ, this is the man, this is Christ, he has done nothing wrong. So it refers to, I always believe, me and the others. Therefore, the disclosure is actually acknowledging me and the others around you. Religious communication, the new normal, should never forget that it will always be a disclosure of identity. It's not only about me, but me being enriched by the you, and you being enriched by the me. So in disclosure of Christ, the criminal who defended him, there is a revelation of presence. Is very good in German, Gegenwart, which is a presence. And then that presence is not only Gegenwart, it's actually Gegenseitig, which is mutual. That presence should actually, that felt presence should be mutual. Our religious communication should not only be Gegenwart, but a Gegenseitig. Ayan, the mutuality. It's actually supposed to be empowering, and we respond to it. Religious communication is a revelation of presence, Gegenwart, truth as the primary communication, which mentioned on the cross, truly I say to you. And then feedback response, mutual, Gegentai. Okay, so that's disclosure. Religious communication sees also imperfection, like in the terms of, this is also nice, in the terms of the thief, who is actually a criminal, therefore imperfect. Religious communication sees imperfection of the instrument of communication as is strengthened by the truth of the message that embodied by Christ. So it doesn't matter if you are not learned, do not have money. It doesn't mean that you cannot communicate religiously, or that you do not have the instruments of communication, the new cell phone like this. It doesn't matter whether you don't have this in terms of religious education. It's the matter there is the truth of the message that you preach. Clothed with human imperfection, persons are invited to a more authentic disclosure, accompanied by a felt need. And this is what I have mentioned before. Here now, in the COVID narrative, I mentioned here the frontliners that each of our countries have. Many frontliners died in the hope of saving lives. Sickness as a physical limitation will be present, yet the communication of authentic service and commitment of many frontliners inspire and shape hope. Ayan, maganda. This is nice about the hope that it brings. St. Augustine mentioned once that hope has two beautiful daughters. One is fear, and actually, one is fear and one is action. Yan, courage. One is fear and courage. Fear that something bad has happened, you need actually that, but you also need courage so that it will not remain the same. So that the fear that you fear will not remain the same. There will be something, you need courage there. Okay, the third word is about woman, behold your son, and it speaks about relationships. Invites person to differ, to open their minds and hearts to new attitude, yet equally profound and sound ways of relational encounter, not based only on blood or usual convention. This means authentic encounter. Later on, as you would see here, it's not only about being interconnected, and as highlighted by Pope Francis, it's not enough to be just interconnected or to connect. What we need is actually authentic. Those connections should lead to authentic encounter. I think this is very much interesting because religious communication, even with the digital things that we do, it's not about connecting people. It's about those connections being authentic, leading to relationships. Religious communication works for the creation not only of connections, but authentic relationships. Okay, repeats and repeats. So one is authentic encounter begets true relationships. It's dual identity, communication, a new normal perspective affirms what is good in ourselves and what is good in other, and that is authentic connection. Recognizing this is actually what I meant before, complementarity. It's not just uniqueness, it's not just equality, but complementarity, seeing the good in ourselves and also in the others. Relationship in religious communication invites people to deepen their relationship and go beyond proximity to real concern for the others, be they close relatives or not. Hope is in awareness and concern for what is good for ourselves and also the others. So COVID-19, there is the idea of neighborliness as seen in the Philippine concept of bayanihan and damay. Bayanihan means working or cooperating together, and then damay is actually helping. Here, the Italian words are actually interesting, used by the Pope. Actually, it's called vicino and prossimo, which is vicino is near, proximity, and then prossimo is just neighborliness. And Pope Francis emphasized here not necessarily to be a neighbor, vicino, but prossimo. Filipinos actually communicate this using only one word but accented differently. Malapit, which is distance. For now, for example, distance-wise, because of computer, I am near to you. You can hear me. Pero I could not say that we are yet malapit because we just met, all of you. It's actually a close concern, which means even though you're in other countries, if we are malapit, therefore that is neighborliness. Your concerns, even though you are far, becomes my concern too. And I believe that is the highlight of religious communication, not only to bring people near to each other, but actually to know their concerns, Next is the fourth word, my God, why have you abandoned me? From I think for the first three were good. This is somewhat, in a sense, not that good. Why have you abandoned me? And what does it say? Here I could say, in terms of religious communication, it's actually isolation. The first and the fourth words together, paradox between absolution and abandonment, trust, inquiry, identity, and doubt. When the feeling of security and surety seem no longer sustainable, COVID brings this one too. The feeling of security for anyone is no longer sustainable. We have to follow the protocols. Forsaken means being abandoned. Isolation is a painful encounter with God, a cry of pain when He is mostly sought. COVID-19, experiences of death and isolation manifest and communicate such pain. Of course, in isolation, there is always communication breakdown. Religious communication is an exchange of deep relationship and despair, surprise and wonder. We remember here, of course, that no man is an island. Growth is impeded or else stopped. Isolation, religious communication in the new normal is clothed with the stigma of isolation and human frailty. I like that human frailty that Professor Chandra has mentioned. You mentioned human frailty, and this is actually it. Yet continues to live in the heart that feeds a treasured value of hope. You may be frail, but you cannot not be without hope. God has enabled persons to recognize the grace to never be forgotten by Him. I remember once in an interview that they made in one hospital when I gave a seminar to them, one was saying, Father, I lost faith in hope already. Because actually my parents died, my sister is now under COVID, I really lost faith. And then the other thing that I was only mentioned, but if you have lost faith in hope, does that mean hope has lost faith in you too? Has hope lost faith in you? And she was able to answer me at once. She said, Father, I think not. Hope will never have lose faith in me. So it was a good one. I think religious communication should home into that too. Not that losing faith in hope, but hope not losing faith in us. That is actually religious communication. Therefore, as I mentioned here, narratives of experiences of death challenges us people to transform the death around us that comes Not that the dead are brought to life like Lazarus, but that their passing away becomes for their families easier, much easier to bear. So the isolation is solved. Fifth word is actually I thirst. The fifth word is I thirst, which is actually for me a representation of exigency. The shortest among the 7 words communicates a longing satisfaction to a physical exigency. It's awareness and response to a need that is needed in religious communication at this end. Exigency actually means, what does it mean? Consents want to refer, of course, to Maslow's hierarchy of needs when you mention needs. That one will never be lost. In 1943, the original one, 1 to 3, his original one is 1 to 3, an actualization. And in 1998, he added actually self-transcendent, actually after the self-fulfillment and actualization. She's very good here, which means even in our religious faith, in terms of self-transcendence, becomes actually probable. Even in the needs. Communication and response of satisfaction, the Greek teleos, which is actually fulfillment and perfection. Later on, we'll go back to that. This one is just to show you the esteem needs, belongingness, safety, sociological needs. Okay, religious communication is awareness of connection with self, human condition. Teleos is fulfillment, becomes an excellent goal, yet always hard to attain. Human beings cannot be without weakness, limitation, or needs. Therefore, exigency will always likewise exist as human beings that we are. More plausible attitude is actually maturity. A person can be complete or mature even though he or she carries limitation. And as the famous adage says, it is much easier to be mature and still have flaws rather than be without flaws. Many are mature, but few, if any, are without flaw. So talaga namang it's be with us that for that exigency should be met. Religious communication can actually respond to it. How? In the new normal, it champions awareness of identity and response to fulfill the hierarchy of needs. It is not without its own flaws and needs. It is dynamic and continues to perfect itself. This is important, to mature. It liberates us from isolation as it informs, entertains, and educates. These are the basic definition of communication.
Okay, Norman, you have about 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, COVID-19, most Filipinos abide by them. Okay, the 6th word, okay, it is finished. Not yet the talk that I have, okay? It is finished. Okay, we struggle to discern the world around us. God on the cross showed us how the world understands and also how such understanding can be meaningful and significant. Fulfillment is a sign of relief. Fulfillment of life for humanity is finished, but not its distribution, and each of us would say. So here, the fulfillment means tetelestai, it is finished. The use of the imperfect perfect tense, significant, referring to an action made yet continues. That is the one. It's actually in the perfect tense. Already done, but continues. And that's what actually the words does. That's what our communication does. It should be dynamic, a continuous one. It never stops. So it's actually punctulia, the aorist. Our present tense is actually linear. Hope is planted. Now it's our turn. Nurture and harvest. I will not discuss this. Fulfillment. It's not closing or termination, but opening a door to fulfillment. And this is the one. Hope is planted, our turn to nurture. Religious communication must be rooted in the perfect tense that recognizes the reality of communication that was done, yet strains forward towards the teleos, maturity, healing, and actually growth. 7th word, into your hands I commend my spirit. It's actually entrustment. The cross made sense of suffering, which makes it bearable. This is actually even our suffering. The task of religious communication is to help people make sense of what is happening around them, to let them feel their real worth. Entrustment, sinistao, in Greek, synonymous, commit, darkness and sun, indicative of pleasant things that are happening. Too often in our yearning to rely on God, we refuse to take responsibility for our choices. God who loves, God is the ultimate word who never dies, always trustworthy. And I commend my spirit is a kaleidoscope for me of hope, enabling constructive victory to be gained, which is actually sin afterwards. So entrustment in religious communication, normal, reminds person what and whom to trust and how communication should trust. Authentic trust is built on authentic relationship, which is what Jesus had. Communication, a felt presence that nourishes. Yan, yung mga, here I included the fake news, the bad and the good. Entrustment, assurement that fear and anxieties are not the last words. They already have been overcome by God. I think in every religion that is true. overcome by God. Okay, now counterculturality. This one is actually, I will skip this. I will just go to the conclusion. Okay. Religious communication in the new normal strongly affirms God's relationship with creation, the balance. In tragic events like the pandemic, it invites to a perspective and attitude that is new. It empowers persons feeling isolated to a disclosure, to act and communicate their successes as well as their failures in their fulfillment. It is an invitation to an entreaty and relationship that strains forward, chained to a network of exigencies, but equally armed with an embodied network of hope. The pandemic comes as an event waiting hope and entrustment. God is always the communication hero who champions it in any religion. He is present and challenges people to affirm their human spirit, clothed with the image and likeness that is his very own. And with that, I would just like to already actually end. Ending with this, he who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow. He who communicates with a why can bear with almost actually anyhow. So I thank you. Thank you very much.